Since at least the 1980s, women have been told that marriage and motherhood were no substitute for a career, that you could have it all, spend your early to late 20s in education, partying hard and riding that carousel, and when your career had reached a point where you could start thinking about marriage and a family somewhere in your early to mid-30s, you could do so with the confidence of being a proud and independent woman. The problem is, this narrative has in reality ended with countless women in places like this, Bali, Indonesia. While something of a hotspot for single 30, 40, and 50-something Australian women who come to hook up with the local gigolos euphemistically known as Bali boys, you'll also find single leftover European women doing the same thing in Africa and single North American leftover women in the Caribbean with gigolos there. It should also be noted that this phenomenon is not exclusive to the Western world. In countries that have witnessed the loosening of sexual restrictions, the dissolution of the family unit, and the economic integration of women into the workplace, or what has been come to be called women's liberation, the same phenomenon exists. In Japan, there is a tsunami of leftover women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, and while they don't outsource their libido and their loneliness to other countries, there does exist an entire industry that caters to their singledom and at times their celibacy. Host clubs, such as these in the Kabukicho district of Shinjuku in Tokyo. While women since at least the 1960s or 70s were promised fulfilling and rewarding careers as well as a full family life, what many have found after hitting the wall is a life filled with hen parties, smothered in cheap wine, and endless days spent searching for new cat toys, or the life spent as a leftover woman. While in the Western world, media is literally telling women that you don't have to settle, and about the joy of living and dying alone, that data confirms more women have realized that there are far worse things than dying alone, which is bad news for the patriarchy. And there is that nebulous patriarchy again, always to be defied and always to be reviled. And there are many women that will cut off their nose to spite their face when rejecting the confines of this system to organize human societies, which is the vast majority, by the way, and for a reason. But nevertheless, in Japan, there are many that have said that they have come to accept their life of solitude. And I personally know many women and a few men that have resigned themselves to a life spent alone and in celibacy for most of the time. But that doesn't mean that this is an optimal outcome for the individual or for society. Even Candace Bushnell, author of Sex and the City, who is said to have left a trailblazing legacy for women on television, now believes that the independent lifestyle of non-committal casual sex and of being perpetually single that she had championed may not be as rewarding after all, and now admits that she regrets not having kids. She's now 60, and after a divorce in 2012, she admitted that it made her realize how not starting a family made her feel truly alone. Since the introduction of the contraceptive pill as well as abortion on demand, combined with the introduction of women into the workforce, that has over the decades necessitated the need for women to stay in education longer and longer, and this is during their peak fertility years, we have seen since the 1970s birth rates crashing across the developed world to a point where countries are no longer even capable of replacing themselves. In the United States, barely half of adults are married, and for many that are, having children becomes a choice of affordability, of lifestyle preference, and a plethora of many other things. Education and wealth are also correlated with fertility, meaning the more educated and more income a woman has, the less children she's likely to produce. And sadly, the reverse is also true with all of the dysgenic consequences that we are seeing emerge in society today. And it is at this confluence that we reach an inflection point identified within human civilizations by Oswald Spengler, the German historian, philosopher, and political writer, and he discussed it in his magnum opus, The Decline of the West, that was written shortly before the First World War. When the ordinary thought of a highly cultivated people begins to regard having children as a question of pros and cons, the great turning point has come, for nature knows nothing of pro and con. Everywhere, wherever life is actual, reigns an inward organic logic, and a drive that is utterly independent of waking being, with its casual linkages and indeed not even observed by it. The abundant proliferation of primitive peoples is a natural phenomenon which is not even thought about, still less judged as to its utility or the reverse. When reasons have to be put forward at all in a question of life, life itself has become questionable. At that point begins prudent limitation of the number of births. And at that point too, in Buddhist India as in Babylon, in Rome as in our own cities, a man's choice of woman who is to be not mother of his children, as amongst peasants and primitives, but his own companion for life, becomes a problem of mentalities. The modern marriage appears the higher spiritual affinity in which both parties are free. Free, that is, as intelligences, free from the plant-like urge of the blood to continue itself, and it becomes possible for a Shah to say, and I think this is the important part, that unless woman repudiates womanliness, her duty to her husband, to her children, to society, to the law, and to everyone but herself, she cannot emancipate herself. As a civilization, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to dispute the fact that we've entered a sort of death spiral. We are a civilization that cannot even produce the next generation to replace ourselves, and have thus outsourced having children to the millions and millions around the globe that clamor to get into our societies, and we do so hoping that they and their children will pay the taxes of tomorrow and fund our retirements and social welfare systems. While many say that this is a wonderful and enriching thing, and it may be, nobody knows the future, whatever comes of it 100, 200, 300, 500 years down the road, Western civilization, unless there is a dramatic change of course, will end. Something new will of course take its place, but the question is, will it be a step forward for human progress or 2 steps backward? And maybe that's just the case for all civilizations. As Spengler notes, all civilizations go through a seasonal-like cycle, and we in the West are in the winter of our own. However, there have been civilizations that have been able to reignite themselves during prolonged periods of crises. While I think the actions of, let's say, Augustus and the Lex Julia de Adulteris Coercendis, which was the first penalization of sexual immorality by the state as far as I know of, would not be workable in today's Me Too and woke world, but a cultural shift in the zeitgeist for the value of family and that of motherhood could over time remedy the destructions wrought upon our societies by the endless consumerism and hedonism pushed onto it over the past 50 years. The inculcation of the love of family, of community, and of nation is the key ingredient. It has been done, it is being done. Currently, Hungary is attempting to increase fertility through incentives. Japan is paying people to have babies, and Italy is also looking into incentivizing fertility. However, the country to look at is actually Israel, where at an impressive 3.1 babies per woman, the nation's average fertility rate also cuts across class and educational attainment lines and is much higher than any other of the OECD countries and is unmatched in the developed world. The second highest is just 2.15 babies per woman in Mexico, almost 1 child less per family. While some point out the ultra-Orthodox fertility rate as being exceptionally high, secular women too are having more children than their counterparts in other developed countries. Others point to factors that affect fertility, and they include the cultural and religious nature of life in Israel, but nobody's actually ever been fully able to explain why that country is so different. Now, via chats that I have had with people that have contacted me from Israel, and remember, this is just anecdotal information, but in those conversations that I've had, one that I had with a young man stands out, and I won't name him. But during the conversation, he told me that he was really excited to soon be getting out of the army, and he was bursting to get married and start a family. He told me that there was a sense of national purpose in that country and a strong sense of community. He also said, and I think this is very important, that Israel was full of vigor as a nation. While this is just one man's explanation, I would agree that community and a sense of purpose is very important for the individual as well as society, and sadly, this has been lost in the West. That having been said, an eye should be kept on Israel because whatever they're doing, they're obviously doing something right. They even have a wall and a homeland for their people, something I think many in the West covet, if they were being honest. So in sum, my advice to the ladies out there is marry young and have your kids young. Once you hit your 30s, you can start your career in strides, or you can join the ranks of the leftover women. And the men of your age, when you are in your 30s, that you might have rejected in your 20s when you had the upper hand, now have the marketplace value. And yours is being reduced by every single year. And in most instances, they will marry younger women, not cat ladies that are finally done with the carousel and ready to settle down. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. Also remember to subscribe over at BitChute, which is the actual only free speech platform left in social media, as you will find many videos posted on that platform that you won't find here on YouTube. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you folks next time.